Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed the networking lunch. I am Maria Salamín Navarro, the conference chair for the 2024 Capital for Good conference. I am honored to have our keynote speakers, Roy Swan, Director of Mission Investments at Ford Foundation, and Antony Bugg-Levine, co-founder and board member of the Global Impact Investing Network, for a discussion on rebuilding faith in our economy and democracy, embracing patriotic capitalism for greater economic opportunity. Antony, I will pass the mic off to you for the discussion and come back when we're ready for the audience questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. It's really great to be here. It's a real honor to be here in this beautiful facility you guys have. I'm Antony, as you heard, founded the Global Impact Investing Network in 2009, where I sit on the board with Roy and a bunch of other people. One thing I'll say about, before we get started, this morning when I came to New York, I live in New Jersey, my 7-year-old asked me, why are you going to New York? And I said, well, I'm going to give a lecture. And she said, why are you doing that? And I said, well, I've got some things that I want to share with people that I think is important for them to find out. And she said, you mean like your awesome recipe of how you make s'mores in the microwave? And I said, no. So here's the deal. If you want to know how to make awesome s'mores in the microwave, come afterwards. I'm happy to tell you. They've been field tested by a discerning 7-year-old. But in the meantime, we have important business. And when I heard when this conference was going to be starting, or when it's taking place, my first thought is what's happening in 10 days, which is that we're going to have an election. The voting's already started here in the US. And I don't think we should be having a conversation around impact investing and social enterprise and the difference we're all trying to make in the world that is not aware of what government does and what this election means. And then a lot of you are not Americans, so it's not just about what's happening in America, but around the world it is very clear that the economy we have built is not serving enough people and is not giving enough people hope that through their hard work they'll be able to secure their kids' future, which is ultimately what most people want in most societies. And so I thought about coming here today and talking about impact investing and social enterprise in the context of what is happening in this country and around the world. And I couldn't think of anyone else better to have a conversation with about that than Roy. So he'll talk more about his background, but what we really want to do out of this session is locate what you guys have been doing, well, the morning sessions, what's going to follow. I know you've got a lot of amazing speakers talking about clean energy transition, and in so many ways, we all can be much more effective in this work if we are thoughtful about how our work does two things: partners with government effectively so that we can be more successful as business leaders and as investors, and also figure out how we can be more effective in helping support the kind of democratic societies we want to live in. I think both of those things are what we want to talk about today. So, with that start, I did want to just turn to Roy and talk about both those questions. And I think the second one is actually more interesting. What can we do as investors and business leaders to help support democracy? But the first one I think is really important for you guys to take away from this conversation, and that is the best impact investors and the best social entrepreneurs are the ones who have a deep understanding of the importance of working with government and don't believe that the purpose of our work is to try and do something around government. And so Roy, you've seen that from so many different angles. Just talk to us a little bit about your experience in big banks, community banks, with some of the government-sponsored entities, and how you see the role of government essentially a part of what investors and social entrepreneurs are trying to achieve.
Great, thanks. Is this thing on? Can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. I start most of these sessions by making a couple of comments so you'll know where I sort of sit, contextualize myself. First thing I say is I'm the luckiest guy in the world for a number of reasons. One of them is sitting here in the audience. The second thing you should know about me is I'm a preacher's kid, which means that regardless of whether you're religious or not, there is a tenet of religion that I was brought up with, which was to whom much is given, much is expected. And much is a subjective term. It doesn't matter what you have. It could be much in comparison to someone else. The third thing I'll say is I am a failed pre-med, which means I'm one of those people, I actually did all the painful pre-med courses. It's a long story on how I failed, but the reason why I wanted to be a doctor goes back to the earliest stages of my memory, and that is of a doctor in my town. I grew up at a time when black people still went to black doctors because white doctors didn't have any interest in serving them. And there was Dr. Corsi, and I remember he'd be standing there in his home office. He'd open the door sometimes himself, and he's this very elegant, tall guy. I'm 4 or 5 years old looking up at him, and he's got a cigarette in one hand and his glasses in the other. These are days when doctors smoked in their offices, late 60s. And I said, I want to be like Dr. Corsi. I want a job where I'm paid to heal people. I'm paid to help. So that's who I am. I want to thank Antony and Columbia and Maria for the great job she's done leading this conference. I want to acknowledge, this is very important, I'm sorry I'm building into this and taking a while to answer your question, and I may ask you to ask it again because I may have forgotten by the time. But my brain trust is here. They're sitting in the front row. We have Jared Crooks, who is both a mentee and an advisor. He is, like me, a Princeton grad, and he's literally a rocket scientist. And he has been working at the intersection, like of capitalism and society for some time. He's got an illustrious set of experiences. So, Jared, thanks for coming. And the second is one of the reasons why I'm the luckiest guys in the world, and that is because I think most parents want nothing more than to have children who are smarter than they are. And I'm here to tell you that I've been very successful. My daughter, Roy Swan, has also been my advisor, and I need to give her credit right now for something that I feel tremendous guilt for. When she was 14 years old, I asked her a question when I was preparing for an interview with a Wall Street Journal reporter. The interview was on the Dalton School, which is not far from here on the Upper East Side. And the question was, what makes Dalton special as relates to diversity? And I was asking my daughter, I said, well, what do you think? And she says, Dad, for the location and the price point, Dalton does a remarkable job of having a diverse community. The only quote I got in that Wall Street Journal article that was attributed to me was the one that my daughter gave me. And so I want to give you credit for that quote. Because so getting back, so now I'm going to get to your question. It is, when I travel around the world, I've been on many continents, many countries, talked to world leaders, et cetera. The thing I point out to those outside the US is America's competitive advantage is its government. Now, government gets demonized, gets attacked, et cetera, but our government is extraordinary for a couple of reasons. One was pointed out in the book, Why Nations Fail. The two authors of that book recently won the 2024 Nobel Prize in Economics. And what they talked about was two things that were critical to prosperity of nations and political stability. One is the inclusivity of the system and relative, notwithstanding protests in the streets, et cetera, we always can get better. But America's a great country. We are super inclusive. The second thing is lucky events, as I'll refer to them. And that is, by way of example, you think about what could have happened if things didn't go FDR's way during the Great Depression, when he built the safety net. What if that was voted down? And then Hitler, a series of lucky events led to him not being able to fulfill his plan. So so the U.S. has a system of inclusivity and policies that have incentives baked in to put wind at the back of capitalists. And I do believe that capitalism is the absolute worst system except for all the alternatives. And that is what makes us so successful. And That's our secret weapon. I've now spoken for about 8 minutes straight, so I'm going to stop.
No, I really appreciate that context. And I think one of the dangers with impact investing in social enterprise, and we've been at this, I've been at 15, 20 years, you've been even longer. I think there's a tendency for people, some people, especially in the Northern Californian part of this, to say, well, government is messy. I don't like how cumbersome it is. I have to deal with all these different groups and get permits and approvals. Things are slow. I still genuinely want to make a difference in the world. So they find their way into impact investing in social enterprise as a way to do good while working around government. Like, I don't have to deal with government. I get to be an investor. I get to run a business that's going to solve social problems. And I think I've always felt that that point of view missed a fundamental reality. And so, again, just in your experience, do you agree that that's a problematic way to look at it? And what specifically in the work you've done in the various roles you had sort of point to the fact that the best impact investors are actually the ones who work effectively with government as opposed to around it?
As Antony mentioned, I've worked in pretty much every sector that we, nonprofit, private sector, philanthropic sector, quasi-government. Right down the street, the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone was my first experience in government, and it was a deep one because it involved the city, state, and federal governments. And the Empowerment Zone program was Clinton's big domestic policy because it didn't have all the subsidy heft of Lyndon Johnson's program, but it had been specifically designed to solve very specific problems, and that was to revitalize the most distressed cities in the country. In order to be effective in the way we approached that, we had to deeply understand the rules and regulations, the history of government interventions, the use of tax policy, tax incentives, and that's what, because we understood that deeply and we took the time to dive in. I am a rabbit hole guy. I'm one of the people that will read the 1,000 plus page Bank Holding Company Act so I can figure out, when I was at Morgan Stanley, I figured out how to create subsidiaries that I knew more about this stuff because I looked for how government can help. And there's a lot of ways government can help. Because we understood the rules and regs deeply around empowerment zones, that program shuttered in 2004. All the other empowerment zones, the original 5 shut down. The one I was involved with Debbie Wright, who lives not far from here, is still around. It's got, out of 250 million, it's got 70 million, and that's because we decided, unlike others, we wouldn't just give away the money. We would actually create a recycling investment pool. Others may not have been aware of that. Similarly, when I was at Morgan Stanley, where I was responsible for Morgan Stanley's capital invested under the Community Reinvestment Act, which, by the way, is another super important program where the government has put the wind at the backs of capitalists. If you understand how it can work, many bank CRA programs are expected to break even or lose money. My team, we exceeded Morgan Stanley's target for the overall business. And we were enormously profitable, and we were also a halo that burnished the Morgan Stanley brand because we figured out how to be great corporate citizens and great business people. I had a P&L target that I exceeded, and it's because I took the time to understand the regs, to talk to the regulators, and figure out what were the arbitrage opportunities available, information arbitrage. How could I use the information that was available to do good things for the community and for Morgan Stanley? That is the essence of patriotic capitalism.
Yeah, and we'll get to the specifics of patriotic capitalism, which is a term you've coined and something you've been pushing. Just getting back to the point about working with government, I'll give you an example from my experience. My own personal experience, I spent 10 years running a community development finance institution. If you don't know what those are, you guys should look it up. CDFIs, there's now about 1,300 of them around the country. subsidized with a lot of money from the Treasury, and they were really born out of a history in which the banks were intentionally, for racist reasons, withholding loan capital from small business owners and homeowners, specifically black homeowners and small business owners in American cities. The last echo of the civil rights movement, large legislative victories in the mid-1960s, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. One of the last kind of echoes of that is something that Roy mentioned, which is the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977, which mandated banks in America who want to stay in good standing with their regulators for things like merger approvals that help them make money have to also prove what they are doing to overcome this racist legacy of withholding capital from certain communities. What that then precipitated was, rather than doing it themselves, a lot of the banks said, we're not going to be as effective making those loans as people from the community, so let's make loans to them, grow them as entities, and they can make those loans and close those capital access gaps. So that's a specific government program. The result of that, along with ongoing subsidies from the federal treasury, has been this whole movement called community development finance institutions. I ran one of them for 10 years, called Nonprofit Finance Fund. We were lending to homeless shelters, soup kitchens, health clinics. There is a pretty low moral and economic ceiling above which you cannot charge someone to spend the night in a homeless shelter, go to a health clinic if they're very poor, or go to a school. If you are trying to create a business in the space where you're dealing with closing educational outcomes gaps in America, closing health outcomes gaps in America, dealing with basic social issues like homelessness, there's amazing opportunities for you as a business owner to be effective in that space. There's going to be great opportunities for you as an investor. It is highly unlikely that if the work you're doing is deep in addressing issues of equity, that at some point your business model or your investees are not going to rely on government revenues. So as a lender, we lent to an amazing organization called the Bowery Residents Committee, BRC. You probably see them if you're in the subways. They're guys who do outreach all the time. They had an opportunity they had a 30-year lease on a building on 36th Street on the west side. They needed $30 million to turn it into a 200-bed homeless shelter. We provided the first loan that got them to the point where Goldman Sachs in that case was comfortable making the kind of project loan. We don't get repaid as an impact investor unless the government is there to pay them for the services they provide to the people who are in those shelters. That's just one example. On the other side, everyone here has heard of City Block Health, or maybe someone's here from City Block. City Block Health is a company incubated in Google Labs. Their model is to provide better healthcare in a more effective way to people who are marginalized from our healthcare system. And the outcome of that work is they are making a massive difference in improving health outcomes for some of the poorest, most vulnerable people, starting in New York City, starting in Brooklyn. They are privately held, they're on their way to an IPO, and currently have a $6 billion valuation. So they have been very successful as a business, also been successful in the impact they've had. A friend of mine invested in an early stage round of their capital from the investing side. She put $100,000 in out of her $10 million seed fund that she had raised from outside investors. That investment is on a trajectory. Again, nothing's guaranteed. Likely that investment will return the entire $10 million that she got from her LPs just in that one investment because of how successful they've been. That is a for-profit solution to improving health outcomes for vulnerable people in New York. The reason they have a $6 billion valuation, they're also doing it in a way, to your point, Roy, that is lucrative. They are lowering the cost of healthcare, which creates massive savings for insurers, and they're being figured out how they can share in those savings, and that's what drives their revenues and profits. But you don't get to have that kind of impact and business if you're not, from the jump, incredibly savvy about how you work with government. So I think that's one part of how government can be a part of the solutions you guys are creating. The other part of it, I really want to turn the conversation to the other piece, which is this point about patriotic capitalism. You began by saying, we're the luckiest people in the world where we live and when we live. I'm an immigrant, so I have an immigrant's love for America. This country, in a weird way, has given my family refuge twice. My grandparents were Holocaust refugees who landed in New York Harbor in 1939. They then left. I was born in South Africa and became an immigrant myself in 1984. So twice this country has given harbor to our families and created incredible opportunities for us for all the reasons you mentioned. But I also increasingly feel we cannot take for granted that our luck is going to continue. And part of impact investing in social enterprises, reluctance to embrace government has limited the success of investors who don't see the need to understand government revenue flows. But the other part of it is your work on patriotic capitalism, which I think is really a charge to everyone to say, you cannot take for granted the system we have. as investors, we need to not only be working effectively with government, but actually playing a part in preserving the democracy that we are lucky enough to have, and to creating an economy that's going to give more people the kind of hope that will unhinge them from people who are trying to destroy their own sense of, commitment to what this country is about. So can you talk a little bit more about what is patriotic capitalism, why it is a moral imperative, why it is a business imperative, and then what the people in this room can do to help support it? And I'll come back to those questions, but that's the four I'd love you to follow up on.
So I have a bit of an adolescent brain, which I say sometimes, which is I have so many things that I want to say, and I get all scattered, and I typically forget the best parts of what I want to talk about. So I started carrying my little notepad and pen around. But let me start with some context. And first of all, I know this is a business school event, but I'm here to tell you that psychology eats economics for breakfast. And in the time I've spent studying over sort of 40-ish years, business and economics and economic systems, I spent a lot of time talking with some of the most brilliant minds, geniuses in certain perspectives. But at the challenge that we face, and I talked about this a couple days ago at the Ford Foundation board meeting, which we held in Detroit, which was in celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Grand Bargain, where the Ford Foundation helped save kind of the arts community when Detroit filed bankruptcy. It's also the home of Henry and Edsel Ford, the founders of the Ford Foundation back in 1936. The challenge that we face to increasing prosperity boils down to one thing, and that's human frailty. And so the very fact that we are who and what we are impedes our success. There's some great work by neuroscientist and social psychologist Robert Sapolsky. One of my favorite books he's written is called A Primate's Memoir. Highly recommend it. Here's the reasons here are the things that shackle our progress. One, our tribal instincts, which have a tendency to make us attack anything that's different than we are. Two, fear and anxiety. Fear and anxiety trumps hope and joy. No pun intended there. Three, the existential search for meaning, which in America is pegged to racial and gender hierarchies of superiority and inferiority. So when you take those factors into account, and you also take into account the environment of political discourse, which has weaponized certain words, like the term woke, which before it became weaponized just meant, being awakened to something. ESG, which some of you may, environmental, social, governance factors that go into risk management, that was weaponized. Well, when I was thinking about things and what we were trying to achieve at the Ford Foundation, I thought about the fact that words matter, because words can be triggering. I didn't know until I read Robin DiAngelo's book, White Frailty, that I could walk into a room and just say the word diversity or tell me about the diversity of your team. And the listener, who may have been a white male, would hear me saying, "You're a racist," just because I asked a question and because I used a word. So I've become much more clear on what the drivers are of people's behavior. And patriotic capitalism, thank you. We only have 10 minutes, partly because I was here late. Patriotic capitalism really means capitalism with the interests of country, democracy, and the common good in mind. And with that formula, we all win. The problem is not everyone wants everyone to win. And as I talked about at the Ford Foundation board meeting a few days ago, when you look at if you look at a line graph that showed real wage growth from 1979 to 2021, the top 1% wage growth more than doubled. The bottom 90% went up about 26%. Now, housing went up around 100% over that period of time. The pathway to fascism is paved with wealth and income inequality and divisiveness. And there is an author, Peter Turchin, I think his name is, who predicted that America would collapse in 2020. He wrote this book about 15 years ago. And he said because of the battle and divisiveness of elites versus the rest of us. I should stop, but I will say, as bad as before, as difficult as the environment might be and the challenges, we believe at the Ford Foundation we have some solutions. One of the challenges of bridging academia and the real world is the difference between identifying problems and actually executing on solutions. So at the Ford Foundation, we understand the academia, and we have the tools to execute, and that's what makes us, that's our superpower.
So after telling us that our country's going to collapse and that our human nature is pegged to be divisive, what are you hopeful about? So patriotic capitalism, it sounds, and by the way, you should Google Roy. He's been writing about this in Forbes and elsewhere, has a whole framework and thinking about it. But in the few minutes we have, it sounds like the premise of patriotic capitalism is that, and I love the language because a really important part of the story, look, again, for those of you who care about America, I know you're not all American, but that's where we are. We have an election in 10 days. If you believe three things, we don't want a civil war in this country. We are not going to have partition because we don't actually live in different parts of the country. The people with different political views are scattered amongst each other. And we're not going to create a political reality where one side ultimately dominates enough to completely take over our democratic system. If you believe those three things, we have to figure out how to work, not with everyone, because no one's asking you to compromise your values to work with people who are beyond the pale of reasonable engagement on either side. But we do need to find ways to work together. And I think the language that I really like about patriotic capitalism is it's language that should resonate with everyone. I think most people can shake their heads and say, yeah, in America, most of us are capitalists, and patriotic is something that I really hope is not a term held by one side or the other. So I think you've got some, the language works to be inclusive and bring enough people together. Again, for this room, for people who are aspiring to be working in impact investing, to be promoting businesses that also are social enterprises, promote sort of social value, what does it mean in practice? And what are some of the examples, maybe specifically, that you've seen of who are the patriotic capitalists you admire and who that you support through Ford or know elsewhere and that give you hope? Mm-hmm. Without being a Pollyanna, we can't leave everyone here, going up to their bunkers in Manitoba.
Yeah, and I hope we have, I don't know, Maria, I hope we have permission to go a few minutes over, given which I have the audacity to ask for, even though I caused the tardiness here. But one of the things that's important for all of us is to recognize our fears and anxieties, wrestle them to the ground, and turn them like a catalytic converter, turn them into positive energy. I spend most of my time doing that, but I first need to understand the challenges. So I am just two very specific examples. One does not require reinventing the wheel, and that is we have a concept that we call it the Berkshire Hathaway of quality jobs. Okay, everyone knows that Berkshire Hathaway. Well, many know it's a collection of companies that are great companies and has made Warren Buffett been recognized as the greatest investor and one of the wealthiest people ever. Well, fortunately, we have a past in America that includes people like Milton Hershey, Julius Rosenwald, and the Johnson & Johnson Credo, which they were all about stakeholder capitalism. So the goal for us is to use our impact investing capital and deploy it in a way where we can generate very significant financial returns and even more significant social impact. Here's what I mean. Fairness and engagement when it comes to workers, extremely profitable. The intellectual capital is available. You have Professor Zeynep Tun, sorry, it's not Columbia, but at MIT Sloan School, she's co-founder of the Good Jobs Institute. You have the Toyota Production Service Center, Support Center that focuses on engagement. We have data from Pew Research, I think it is, or maybe it's Gallup. 70 to 80% globally, that is, of workers are disengaged, and that is costing $9 trillion annually. In the U.S., it's over $600 billion. If you apply an S&P multiple to that, you get to $13 trillion in unleashed value that could come simply from engaging workers. And the leader of this enterprise, we haven't made it publicly yet, but this person dramatically increased net income of the company he bought by raising wages and increasing benefits. Because we know that when workers feel like they're a part of the organization and have a purpose, they become more innovative, more productive, and the company becomes more profitable. Everybody wins. So that's one example. We believe there can be massive positive results. The second is diverse fund managers. So all our impact investing themes at the Ford Foundation are based on big social problems where we believe we can deploy capital and generate risk-adjusted market rates of return and positive social impact. The problem with diverse fund managers that we're solving with that theme, of the 80+ trillion in assets under management in the U.S., 1.4% of that is managed by firms owned by women and people of color, yet women and people of color represent 70% of the U.S. population. If in a capitalist system, if you don't have access to capital, what you have is a problem. We love white men. So this is not about white men being a problem. This is about an imbalance, an economic imbalance that is devastatingly destructive. And if we can, and here's the thing, I believe in bribery for this purpose. Gary Becker, another Nobel Prize winning economist, said that white men are willing to absorb costs and pay to maintain, again, this is existential, to maintain exclusivity and superiority. But I believe that every person has their price. So we can figure out how to communicate the value to be unleashed from fairness in a way that overcomes that human frailty of pegging your existential value to gender and racial oppression, then it's like a state of nirvana. I think that's the right word to use. So one of our goals is to allocate more of our capital beyond that 1.4%. We're over 60%. Our returns have been well in excess of what we've exceeded so far beyond it's hard to describe. But those are two examples where we all win. And importantly, and this is one of those things where people might look at me cross-eyed, white people will win more because white people own all the assets. There's a Confederate general who spoke and begged the U.S. government to pay reparations to black people, in addition to the reparations that were paid, freed slaves, in addition to the reparations that were paid to the slave owners, and they were paid because they lost their property. This Confederate general who had risked his life to preserve slavery said, give those freed black people money because it's just going to recirculate back into our community. We're all going to be better off. Let's all try to figure out how we can convince people that fairness is good. The moral case and the business case is the one that Adam Smith, the god of capitalism, made. If you read his works like I have, He mentions invisible hand once or twice. He mentions the impartial spectator, which is a little angel that sits on your shoulder and tells you, you know, that ain't the right thing, or yes, go ahead and do that. He said no economic system could be sustainable without morality. That's all been excised. It's been stripped by opportunists who are selfish as opposed to having a sense of enlightened self-interest, where they're better off, we're better off, everyone wins. All right, so I'm now 2 minutes over.
I can't think of a better way to end than that. It's better than we're all heading toward doom, so thanks for that. I know you want to do the questions. There's the app, so if anyone has questions, get them on the app, upvote.
Yeah, we've gotten a couple of questions, so maybe I can start with those. Some of the most voted would be, could you expand on the role of green movements and corporate responsibility as part of American patriotism and the value of the land and resources that America has?
That was green resource?
Yes, green movements and corporate responsibility as part of American patriotism.
Yeah, so the green movement is the most important existentially focused movement, and that is our own survival. So I guess, you know, you can have a lot of money in a scorched earth and no one's around, so that's a problem. Corporate social responsibility, that term is what triggered Milton Friedman to write his famous 1971 New York Times article, "The Social Responsibility of Business is to Maximize Profits." However, this is what he also said, that people, again, talking about excising things, he says in the same article, of course you're going to take care of your workers. Of course you're going to take care of your communities. But just don't call it social responsibility. That's just basic citizenship. So unfortunately, some people are triggered by words like, believe it or not, people are triggered by words like equity or social justice, because they associate it, unfortunately, they associate it with black people, and it's rarely a winning strategy to associate stuff with black people in America. Unless it has to do with sports and media, and that's not meant to be derogatory because I myself am black, but one of the things I have to do is call it like I see it, because someone's got to, and that's what I'm at the Ford Foundation to do. So that was a really long response to a simple question.
Thank you.
And just to add on that, I think, you know, there's been a green movement for a long time, longer than I've been alive. There's been people working on some of the issues that Roy mentioned around equality and equity. And I think what we've done with impact investing is we've given a language in which we can all work together. And the premise of green investing is simply to say, when you're out there making profits, there are externalities, there are things that your work and your company is doing that are creating positive and negative impacts on the environment, and we should notice them, value them, and manage as if they matter. That's really what, at its basis, green investing is. That's also what investing with a healthcare perspective is similarly. When you make an investment, are you going to improve people's health outcomes or make them worse? And I think what's powerful is find a place in this work that you are deeply passionate about and committed to, because it is hard. There are entrenched interests making a lot of money right now with the system the way it is. The longer I do this work, the more aware I am and angered and frustrated at the power of inertia and incumbency to stop good things happening. But don't come whining about it. You've chosen to do this work. You're going to have to find work you're passionate about, because that passion is going to need to sustain you. If that's environmental work, that's great. If it's around racial equity, I think what we're trying to describe here are the ways in which you can enter into this work from a place that makes you passionate, but also find a sense of unity. When I began this work, to my shame, I used to say, you know, all you green investors care more about the planet than you do about people. I don't want to be working with you guys because ultimately I care more about people. And that was not a helpful way to frame this. We need to be working together with all the people who say this capitalistic system has got to value and act, and not just say that it values all the ways in which what we do impacts the world we're in. So I think there's a lot of work to be done for us to come together around the green investment movement, the corporate responsibility movement, because the other side is mobilized and resourced. The people who want to keep the system the way it is. So yeah, I just think finding ways, again, to create as big a tent as you can around your work is the only way we're all going to be able to move forward effectively.
Maybe related on that, we can go on to the next question, which is how to scale private and public initiatives and that type of collaboration.
How does what was the first
Like how to scale the public and private initiatives in light of like governance risk, or like how with that collaboration do you see it moving forward?
How do you scale?
Yeah.
Okay. Being very sort of practical, this is something that I've got a fair amount of experience in my time at Morgan Stanley and the Ford Foundation, and that is John McCain once said, you can get a lot done if you assume you're going to live a long time. And the lesson for me there was inch by inch. And so what does that mean? That means we do pilot programs. Some of them succeed, some of them don't. When they succeed, then everyone wants a piece of the game. So one of the things we did at Morgan Stanley was we helped create the first non-tax credit private equity fund for a nonprofit, CDFI. LISC is the parent, National Equity Fund is the subsidiary, and we created a private equity pool to buy and preserve multifamily affordable rental housing that went from 30 some odd million in 2012 to like 3 or 4 billion a few years later. The next is and this is a Harvard Business School case study, we helped another CDFI, True Fund, create something called the Impact Developers Fund. And that was, again, when I was at Ford, went to talk to my old friends at Morgan Stanley, we created a pilot project, extremely successful. The point was to provide enterprise capital to emerging multifamily affordable rental housing property at the enterprise level. And that private equity fund has since attracted attention from many, one of the wealthiest families in the world, several banks. So I guess my key is patience and plotting.
So I'd say that, and I have a different perspective as well. Less practical, but more about where you guys sit and the role you have and what you will play. I think the biggest barrier to scaling all of this good work and the social change that we were talking about is comfort. And you're going to find this in your own lives as well. You're going to encounter it when you're trying to get people to do something different. You're going to succumb to it yourselves. The only way we can scale any of this stuff is for us to really do two things. Focus on what people do, not what they say. I think a lot of people will say, and they mean it. Like talk about what Roy mentioned earlier, 98.4% of all assets managed professionally, investment assets in America, are managed by firms owned by white men. I think there are a lot of people who genuinely are uncomfortable with that. I mean, to Roy's point, 70% of the people in this country are in that 1.6%. 75% of the people born in the last 10 years in this country, and that number is going to grow. So I think genuinely people say they mean to change that. Focus on what people actually do. So that's one thing. I think the more that you can just be really discerning yourselves between what people say they're doing, which is going to be the right thing, and what they're actually doing, which is too often going to be succumbing to what makes them comfortable, will help you be more effective in figuring out who you want to be aligning yourself with, who you want to trust when you go out and raise capital. The other thing I'd say is the issue of scale. You've got to understand the numbers. The reason I started my work at impact investing when I got to the Rockefeller Foundation in 2007, I was sitting around a room, and one of the things about being at a place, Roy's at Ford, I was at Rockefeller, these are institutions that have won Nobel Prizes. They have these long histories and legacies, and you show up, and you're brought into that sense that you've been given this privileged position to really fundamentally change things for good, and not just to go to a village in West Africa and put in some wells and get people clean water, which is super important work. When you go to a place like Ford or Rockefeller, we're going to get everyone in the world. 2 billion people in the world don't have decent sanitation with massive health implications. We're going to solve it. We're going to get health care for everyone who needs it. And so I was in those conversations with people who genuinely were committed to that level of scale. I had also been at McKinsey for a few years, and McKinsey at the time produced an annual report called the Capital Markets Report. I was never on the team that did it, but I read it. I probably read the executive summary each year. So I was sitting in these rooms having these conversations about how are we going to change these, healthcare, housing, sanitation at scale. And I realized the numbers didn't add up. There wasn't enough money in philanthropy to actually do this. People were genuinely committed to doing it, but they weren't thinking through the resource implications of what it would mean to win and what it would take to win. But I happen to know that the capital markets had $100 trillion, depending on how you measure it. And so my work in impact investing began by just saying, if you really want to plan to win, you've got to figure out where the resources are. And the resources are in the private sector. Just going back to that figure Roy mentioned about, I genuinely believe people want to see that number, 98.4%, come down. more importantly, the 1.6% needs to come up. If it doesn't happen, we are denying the asset management industry incredible amounts of talent around this country, and most of the people who've been born in the last few years are just not being tapped into for, to your point, just selfish reasons to have that industry more effective. But think about what scale means. If we had 100, anyone here who's worked in asset management will know that if you set out to say, hey, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm going to create a $100 billion asset management company, people are going to think you're crazy. There are a few of them, but they are outliers. And it will sound incredibly presumptuous to say, I'm going to create a $100 billion asset management company. We need $100 billion asset management companies just to make that 98.4 number get down to about 80. So the question I'd ask you, if you're building a business or if you have any influence over where your own family's money goes, where other people's money goes, what are you doing? Not just to allow some things to start and a few people to, you tap them on the head, you give them a social enterprise award, you write a case study about them, and you get them to a few hundred million, and that's cute. If we're genuinely serious about solving problems, what are you doing on a daily basis to get 100 people of color and women who are marginalized from the asset management industry, $100 billion of assets? And if you are not finding a way to get the first few people the 100 billion, do you think the next 97 or 96 are going to be easier or less easy to invest with? Because the best people are showing up right now trying to do that work. So I think just getting really serious, having an intuition around what these numbers mean, and then going back to government, trillions of dollars a year are flowing through government into the system. You've got to have an intuition on what those numbers mean if you're going to be serious about having conversations about scale, and be serious about what it means to win. Because I think too often we say we want to win, but we don't really think through the implications. You cannot get what you haven't had if you don't do things you've never done. And I think what we haven't done is push ourselves past our comfort zone to get serious about what it's going to take to resource winning.
Thank you. I think this has been incredibly insightful. So please join me in thanking our keynote speakers for joining us today.